Austin, you're up next. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Expat Money and how you came to be red pilled?
So, hello guys. My name is Austin. I work with the gang here on the marketing team, and you know what? It's funny. I lived in Toronto for all my life, and I really thought I'd spend my life within the same kind of 2 or 3 kilometer radius. I had no reason to leave. I enjoyed every day, frankly. And then COVID hit, and I was like, oh, this is just a fun little 2 or 3 day thing. The streets were empty, and I noticed people begin to take things so seriously, and I'm like, dude, what when you've never watched the news and now you're listening and following the rules like like I don't want to use the word sheep, but like a sheep. And little by little, I started to say, wait, they're telling us to stay at home. Oh, they're telling us to wait in line to go to the grocery store. And, meanwhile, all the workers for the grocery store are, many of them are coming from outside of the city on, public transit, and they're not regulating any of that. So it was just nothing added up, right? And as soon as things started to become forced, and just seeing how quickly people became propagandized, it just opened my eyes up to everything, right? Like seeing people wait in a line outside a community center to get a vaccine. That was just like, whoa, what's going on here? Oh, you can't do this unless you get a vaccine. It's like, well, the medical system, if I wanted to see this very doctor, they would tell me to, wait a few months. Oh, but now you guys have all this time in the world to stick a needle in my arm. That didn't add up, right? And just seeing people just fall in line, and I don't know. I was never naturally uh, anti-authority or anti-government, and the government never, as far as I was concerned, the government never really affected me until they told me to put this experimental drug in my arm. So after just on a moment's notice, because I was living alone, and my roommate had moved out with his girlfriend, and I'm sitting at home, and I'm like, okay, there's 30 more days and everything's going to be normal. And 30 days came, and they said 3 months. So I called my landlord and I said, hey, I've been a good tenant. I know I normally would have to give you 60 days. Can we work something out? And he said, Austin, you've been great. Do what you need to do. So that same day, my brother came over with a friend and his pickup truck. We loaded all my stuff up, put it in a storage unit, and I was on the way to Mexico the very next morning. Now, it took me 35 hours to get to Mexico because of how few flights were running at the time from Toronto, just to give you some context. And my plan was to come down for a month, just get some sunlight, kind of decompress a bit, because I was, kind of going through it, just, being in a small little apartment myself, no one to talk to. Friends are being like, oh, we're having a meeting on Zoom and or Skype together and we're having fun. I'm like, that's no, we're not, I'm not doing that. That does not sound like fun. So I get down to Mexico, and it was like everything was normal. People were still in the street. People were still meeting with their families. The number one topic wasn't COVID. It was just kind of business as usual. So after about a month, I was like, oh shit, it's time to go home. So slowly but surely, I started making my way back to Cancun, where they had a direct flight. And on the way, I stopped in this small city, and I just said, wow, this feels more like home than Canada. So, I met the owners of the hotel, and they said, hey, if you want to stay for a month, here's the price. We can help you learn Spanish. So a month went by, another month goes by, and finally I was like, I need to get back home and get back to real life. Went back to Canada. 9 days later, I was back in Mexico figuring out how to get my residency, right? So as soon as, I was told, hey, you don't do this, you don't get to enjoy your God-given liberty, which at the time I'd probably never said the words God-given liberty, right? So that was the wake-up call for me. And, now, unfortunately, for the better in many ways, but unfortunately, I see things for, many things for kind of, as they are, right? And I mean, that's how I came to be red pilled, so you may say.
Well, Austin, I'm sure our audience there'll be more people resonating with what you just said than anything else, because I think what you just described is like the mass exodus from
Yeah.
Western society for so many people. This is the light bulb moment where everything became clear, where they could finally see things, and then that's the genesis. And from there, they've gone into so many of the other things that we've talked about so far in this episode, because that's the powerful thing. Once you see clearly on one thing and start asking questions, you start asking questions about everything around you, you know? So it's just a when you came to ask questions. And I think that, over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of questions asked.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
okay, so I have on Austin's story, if you don't mind, because people don't get this. They don't understand what happened in Canada. So I'm going to go, I think about 2 years ago, Trudeau said, if you are not vaccinated, you cannot leave the country. You can't leave by plane, you can't leave by train, you can't leave by bus, and you can't travel in your own country. So if you're not
Yep.
vaccinated, if you can't show this card that says, I've been vaccinated against COVID, not just any vaccine, but COVID vaccine, you can't get on a plane and go from Toronto to Montreal or Toronto to Vancouver, and you can't get on the
Yeah.
beautiful train that crosses the country. You can't get on. And people were like, what? Like, this is my right. As a Canadian, I should be able to leave whenever I want. And he was like,
Well,
no, you
Susan,
can't go.
Susan, to your point, unfortunately, not many people said, "What the fuck? Like, this isn't right." Not enough, right? Like, Toronto in
Not
specific,
enough.
not enough. Toronto in specific had the quickest vaccine uptake out of anywhere in the world, apart from places like Singapore, where the government would come to your door and stick it in your arm, right? So, people were not asking questions, and people were just like, well, if I want to see my parents, I have to do this. It's like, well, maybe you're not going to see your parents for a while, or figure something out, because what's on the other side of that? And people were not asking questions. And since then, I've really come to kind of struggle with the Canadian mentality of like, oh well, it just letting life happen to us, right? I mean, even politically, over the last 9 years, we've seen our country really deteriorate to the point where now it's kind of the common theme to be, oh, things need to change, things need to change. Well, it's like, well, you weren't saying that when it wasn't, okay to say it. But now that, the pendulum has swung to where, it's safe enough to say it, now we're, standing up in our meek little way, which, is still not, sufficient enough to spark any real change. So unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, not enough people took it serious enough. But one quick funny story: the day before they introduced the you can't travel, you can't enter a restaurant, without the vaccine, I called my brother. I said, dude, it's time. So he was on the very last flight out of Canada to Mexico. And he said on that plane, it was like, oh, where are you going? Oh, I don't know, but I just needed to get out because tomorrow. So he came down on October 29th, and him, myself, and his girlfriend, we rented a house together, and we waited it out. And sadly, he's back in Canada, and but he's getting closer and closer to disassociating himself with the country as well.
Yeah.
After all of
I
this, they
think,
say, oh, we never forced you to get the
We
vaccine.
never, no, no, no,
We
no,
never
yeah, sure,
forced you. It
yeah,
was like, no, we just furloughed you, um, took your kids out of
ridiculed.
school. You couldn't associate. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't shop or go to restaurants. You couldn't do any of these types of things. But we didn't force you. We destroyed your livelihood, your family, your connection to society and other human beings. But we didn't force you. It's like, you're
yeah,
completely.
the same as the seniors' homes where they put 300 seniors in a home and didn't allow their siblings or their family or their children to come and visit, and they died. Like, you die when you don't have physical contact, but they're not to blame. Yeah, right.
No, and then you see who is profiting in many ways, right? Who, people that were making the rules also had, family businesses that printed the stickers that said 6 feet, right?
For
So,
sure.
you start to see these, the financial incentive for people to, keep the scam alive. And it's like, why isn't this in the mainstream news? Oh, because the mainstream news is bought and sold, right? So, like, as we said, it's a snowball effect. Once you see it, you're,